Good evening. My name is Nasser Yassin. I'm the Director of Research here in the Institute, the Issam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. We're also using our new digital signature as AUB's Policy Institute. I'm very glad to welcome you in this event. Sary asked me to do this in English with Dr. Mitri as our director for more than a year now. We've been using Arabic, but Sary said, let's do this in English, so we'll commit to the English.
Rigas. No. Thank you, Tariq.
But he understands Arabic. He understands Arabic. You can test him.
And of course, we will talk about the use of English and Arabic in research and knowledge production today. It's of course our interest as an institute to host such an event, to look at knowledge production in the Arab world. It's actually our vocation as a policy institute to produce knowledge and to translate this knowledge and to make this knowledge useful. We see ourselves most of the time as a space where we try to group those three categories: the producers of knowledge, the users or utilizers of knowledge, and the translators of knowledge. We succeed sometimes, we don't sometimes, but we're trying and aiming to bridge the gulf between those groups or categories. Some call them tribes of users of knowledge and producers of knowledge. Last week we had this event here in AUB, and we had like something around 300 scholars, intellectuals, journalists, students coming to reflect on the Arab uprisings, 5 years after the Arab uprisings. And we had 71 presenters, scholars, talking about their research, presenting papers, some of them keynote. Most of those were in Arabic. And we insisted in having this, the use of Arabic as a language of the conference for the fact that we need the Arab world to be heard. We need the Arab world to be actually read more. And this is what today's event is all about, is really to look at knowledge production in the Arab world and how this can be improved. A colleague of us, Sami Mahroum, he's a professor at INSEAD, but also a fellow in our institute, just published a piece in Project Syndicate. And he mentions, Sary, that the Arab world produces something like 15,000 titles each year, which is equivalent to what Romania produces. If we look at the population proportion of production to population, we need to get this around 200,000 titles a year. And I think this is what today's event is all about. So we want to reflect on those realities in the Arab world, and we want to really get all the colleagues around the table, and we'll present after this to reflect on those pressing questions. That's for me as an introductory note. I'll give now the floor to Dr. Mouin Hamzi. Dr. Mouin Hamzi is well known to us. He's the Secretary General of the Center for Scientific Research, the National Center for Scientific Research, Council for Scientific Research, Majlis al-Buhus al-Almiya. Dr. Hamzi will speak for 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll give the floor to Dr. Hafiz.
Thank you. Excellency, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to attend this session to introduce the English version of the study entitled Knowledge Production in the Arab World, The Impossible Promise. Let me start by congratulating the authors, Sary, Hanafi, and Rigas Arvanitis, for this elaborated study based on extensive surveys addressing a large number of issues and policy investigating institutions and universities. I also wish to thank our valuable partners sponsoring this study, namely AUB, ERD, and ESCWA, as well as the publisher of the Center for Arab Unity Studies. Even though the authors collected massive information, their aim to cover the subjects of research in the Arab world remain an impossible dream. Indeed, it's not one book, but several that are required to address all issues concerned. The authors soon realized the colossal work required and chose to concentrate on selected countries. Allow me here to thank them both for selecting Lebanon as a case study and describing the role that CNRS plays on the Lebanese research scene. Therefore, Allow me to draw your attention on specific themes raised in the study that deserve special attention and further discussion. The perpetuating situation of lack or weak existing national research policy in most Arab countries. Constraining research policy is in most Arab universities, impelling researchers to publish in international journal with high impact factor, while limiting the time they can really allocate to research. The very marginal role, unfortunately, of research in social sciences. Continual conflict between publishing in our mother tongue, اللغة العربية, and English, since the researcher seeks more opportunities to be internationally recognized. Slow development of scientific communities impacting on decision making. In fact, CNRS is trying to address some of these issues in its scientific planning that I would like to mention very briefly. Despite limited financial means, the CNRS is very active in supporting research at the national level. First, through its 4 research centers, and then through its research supporting program. The grant research program co-finances up to 100 research projects carried out in the most research active universities in Lebanon, not more than 10. The Associated Research Units program is intended to bring together multidisciplinary teams from various universities to work on several aspects of national challenges. On the other hand, the scholarship program represents now a clear model of partnership between the CNRS and several universities offering a PhD degree. Strengthening the scientific community in Lebanon is also exemplified by the implementation of collaborative projects with the European Union and bilateral program based on co-ownership and co-funding principles. Finally, I wish to thank the authors once more for their valuable effort and hope to have paved the ground for very fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamzi. We move now to another opening remark, Mr. Ziad Hafiz. Mr. Ziad Hafiz is the acting director, مركز دراسات الوحدة العربية. And he will also talk for 7 minutes, an opening remark about the book and their role in getting this produced. Please.
First, let me express my ambivalent feelings in coming here. I've been here for the last 50 years to this section of AUB, and as I remember, this used to be a 2-floor building where we experienced pain and relief at the same time. It was infirmary. So that makes me really an old-timer around. It's a great pleasure for me to participate in the launching of an important book co-written by my friend and colleague, Dr. Sary Hanafi, and Dr. Rigas Arvanitis, whom I had the pleasure to meet just today. As Acting Director General of the Center of Arab Unity Studies, it is with a lot of pride that I participate in the launching in the English version of a major work originally written in Arabic and published a year ago to date by the Center. The importance of the book stems not only from its contents, which will be discussed today by 2 prominent discussants, Dr. Hassan Sharif and Setni Shami, but also because it is a step in the long road to the rejuvenation or renewal of our Arab civilization. Indeed, the latter is a major objective of the Arab Renaissance Project, also launched by the Center in the month of February, but in 2010. It is a culmination of a long and arduous road of discussions and self-criticism by leading intellectuals, activists, writers from all venues, whether political, intellectual, spiritual affiliations, or about the issues that have plagued and still do the Arab homeland. To those who lament the absence of an Arab project, we do say we have the ARP, the Arab Renaissance Project. It addresses 6 issues that hamper the development and prosperity of Arab peoples. It promotes unity as an answer to fragmentation, participation or democracy against dictatorship, national independence as an answer to occupation and subservience to foreign powers, sustained development as an answer to poverty, social justice as an answer to inequities of the markets and control by the few of the national wealth, and finally, civilization renewal or rejuvenation. The latter is a dear project to me and encompasses a wide range of efforts and issues. Among them is the need to develop an Arab epistemology to address the problems Arabs are facing. A new Arab epistemology requires the production of knowledge, and the latter means emphasizing science. This book is about the issues that face the production of knowledge in the Arab world. I will not dwell into them because they will be discussed at length in this session, but I have to say that the subtitle is really provoking and enervating at the same time, The Impossible Dream. Because I do believe that not only it is possible or feasible to produce knowledge, but necessary. But this is another debate. In social sciences, the problem in my view is that Arab thinkers have been for the last 150 years or so using Western concepts to address local problems. Such concepts may or may not be adequate for such task. Yet little effort was expended to evaluate such concepts that affects all aspects of our life. The book has among its many merits that of addressing the disturbed, quotation mark in the Arabic, المضطربة, state of social sciences in the Arab world and the Arab homeland. In reaction to such shortcomings, and as a substitute to real knowledge and genuine Arab epistemology, we have witnessed the rise of literal and truncated interpretation of religious texts, especially the Holy Quran and the Hadith or tradition, with disastrous results. Science has been circumvented, if not outright excoriated. The need to produce knowledge based on science is of paramount importance. I would submit it is even existential for our survival as a civilization. In living in a globalized world, the production of knowledge becomes fluid. One of the merits of the book that we are launching today is a meritorious attempt at providing answers to such fluidity. In conclusion, I think works like the one we are launching today are a determining step in the right direction of a long journey. In the past, Arabs may have not generated wealth as they think they are doing nowadays, and that at the expense of science and research, but they did produce something more valuable, that is knowledge that they transmitted to the human world. That is the core mission of our civilization renewal, producing and transmitting knowledge. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hafiz. Thank you, Hamzi. I ask now the presenters.
The reason I'm here is because I wanted to prove to you that Rigas Arvanitis is not the pseudo of Sary Hanafi and not his avatar either. I exist. And Mr. Ziad Hafez just said something that's very important, I think, the importance of rooting science as a project, not only as a specific one part of society, but trying to enter into every realm of social activities. I think this is one of the objectives of the writing of this book, which is incomplete, and Dr. Hamza is completely right. He knows better probably than anybody in this room that some of the chapters were done because at the end of discussions that we had, very long discussions on the organization of science, on the role of foreign funding, on the reason why you distinguish a researcher from a professor at the university, on the role that the university has to play into the context of research. And probably, and I'd like very much to thank the National Council for Scientific Research in Lebanon that invited me to stay here 3 years and to have the opportunity to work with Sary, with whom we have worked 10 years before when we were much younger. The subtitle is precisely a provocation. There was a first title that was something like Research, scientific research and knowledge economy. And that was the first enemy we had. Because when you read the World Bank reports and the other reports is we should enter the knowledge economy. And the knowledge economy is to be competitive and to be innovative. All the rest, forget it. What's important is you produce innovation and, right? And Dr. Murad knows better than anybody here because he's head of a program that promotes innovation in the Arab countries. And all the countries in the Arab region are trying to follow this program. And I think this program, which goes with sort of rankings of universities and scoreboards of innovation, innovation indicators and so on, well, this program is wrong. It's wrong because it forgets that scientific research is not linked to only being the best among the best or being the more innovative. It's part, as Antoine Zahlan says, a project of the national sovereignty. It's an activity of influence. I've just talked with my colleagues here that all told me again on scientific diplomacy and the importance it has. It's a tool of also of innovation and useful knowledge, and think of scientific practice. And it's probably the main argument, or that was the main argument that was used. But when you see global issues, you understand that you can't just fit on having innovation and competitiveness as an objective. Otherwise, how do you do the research that you need to have the background information in order, for example, if you want to do something on water, you need to have people working on where is the water, how much you have, what's the role of the snow in the water, and what's the role of contamination. It's also, more than anything else, a professional practice, and Sary is going to work on that, to talk about that, because it's a professional practice and it has to be legitimized in society. And finally, it's an institutional endeavor. We went through in the book, through many documents and historical studies. There are more than one or two. 10 years ago or 20 years ago when I began working on these topics, I was saying that there were very few studies. Today we have some. We have some in Tunisia, we have some in Morocco, we have the evaluations in many countries. So we begin to have a quite clearer view on how all this thing went and why it went or not wrong or right. So the main story goes that after the independence or after the post-colonial periods, the countries created their own research institutions. Then the universities began to grow. Then there was this national science policy. And after the 80s, middle 80s or 90s, you have a sort of, sorry, it's my telephone that rings me because that's one of the defaults I have. You have a creation of a network of institutions that can be analyzed through bibliometric tools, through the evaluation of the scientific production. All this in the Arab region did not went in this linear process I mentioned. And as you had many issues that began to appear. Some of the issues which are very well known is, first of all, there is a real underinvestment in research. The share of amount of money that is spent per capita in the Arab countries is less than $10 per head. In a small country like Ireland, which is not particularly a scientifically very developed country, they spend something like $500 US, I think. And Finland, which is more scientific, but it's a resource-based economy. It's not an economy based on innovation and knowledge, and they spend something like more than $1,000 per head. So not comparing with what Thailand or Greece are spending 10 to 15 times more than any Arab country is spending. So this is a real underinvestment. And the result is there's no match between the actual money that circulates in these countries and what goes to research and to knowledge. This mismatch, I know I'm saying things that are old and very well known, but this mismatch is a real issue because by itself it creates a problem. It's not only that the aims were not attained. It provokes inequalities between countries, and the sudden growth in the last 5 years of the scientific production of Saudi Arabia is not an excuse. Issue number 3, there is a very low population of research. I have here just used the figures that UNESCO is gathering. We know from the work that we did with the Lebanese universities that these numbers are not true. In Jordan, we spend hours going to universities to try to get how many researchers, how many professors do research actually. And its percentages are less than 10% of the personnel of the universities do research actually. And the amount of time they can dedicate to research is very low. So this is also part of the topic. Fourth problem is that the state has been the main and the principal organizer of the institutional models. And this has, among other things, it has condoned the scientific creativity that you could have on the ground. And I believe that there's a real effort to rethink what you could do now that there's sort of multi-level decisional system or model of decision-making that is taking part. This is true also in decentralized countries. Lebanon is really an exception, but it's not an exception for good reasons. So you have different types of research systems in the Arab countries. I've tried to show, after doing some study on the data, I'm just showing the things, so I hope you go to read the book, see what's in that. But what really was striking us is that in order to understand the results of, for example, a multifactorial analysis of all the data that we had in our hands, what was really the thing that was differentiating was not only the size of the research community or the research institutions, it was their dynamism. So you had countries that really had a dynamic growth of their research activity, others that were much less so. To resolve the issue of underinvestment, researchers by themselves go and seek for money outside. This university has been, in Lebanon, the most successful in getting outside funds. It did that not because they're much better brains than here than anywhere else, also they would say that, sorry for the AUB, there's a lot of good brains everywhere, but they're very well organized to do that. So it's a question of really organizing yourself and to try to go and see where the money is. The European Union has put considerable amounts of money on research in the last 10 years. I estimated with my colleagues between 2007 and 2013 there was more than 300 million euros on research. That's enormous amounts of money. Of course it's not equitative. Of course the Europeans are profiting from that. I'm coming, for example, in Lebanon, but this time it's the French who pay my money, my ticket. But of course we have unequal rules of management of the money. But it does not mean that there is no money. It just means that you have to get organized to fetch it. The translation of this interest of the Europeans has been a fantastic growth of co-publications, which is the red part of the publications. And in the case of Lebanon, the amount of collaborations with Europeans has grown considerably. It's the yellow lines. The green lines are co-authored papers with the US. So overall, there's a very difficult institutional context. And for reasons that are not only related to the means, but I just wanted to just talk about that as a first part of this rapid presentation. And we are seeing some positive changes, for example, by the fact there's more and more funds and agencies that are created that launch programs. There's a lot of invention and inventivity in showing methods to promote research. One of them, and probably the most successful we have seen, was in Tunisia, when they were labeling the research teams as with a 4-year program for each research team, and that really triggered an enormous amount of research activity, and very curiously, that was just before 2011. And probably this effort of organizing the research inside the universities is the agenda for the next years. The thing about the national agencies is not at all a detail. Lebanon is the only country that has, since 1966, a research project that is funding research but funds are small. The interest in this funding is that it's labeling the teams precisely on research. The default of this program, it has been always, it's an issue for it. It is limited to the natural sciences, so it does not include the social sciences, among other things. But it has been the only country that had a permanent program of funding through agencies. But now with the new research agencies in the other countries, these amounts are quite high. And comparable in percentages with the amounts of research spent by states in academic. So why the impossible promise? Well, the impossible promise, to come back to your provocation, the impossible promise for me is that mainly this weak institutionalization of research. Being a researcher in this country is not a status, is simply not recognized as such. And I think that it has to do with the place also of the research activity, mainly in universities, since universities have become the main place where research is done, contrary to what was happening 20 years ago, where policies were promoting national research institutions. And as a consequence, we really have a difficulty between a sort of promotion of internationalization, because researchers need to publish outside, they need to publish in English, they need to have a vision of to be promoted outside. And what's the relevance of what they do? Why do they do it? Who's going to use it? I'll let Sary continue on that.
Yes. Okay, so as Rigas announced it, rather there is a very interesting increase in the volume of the research and knowledge production, publication in the Arab world. So this is really good news. However, we will see this news is more in a gray area when it comes to knowledge translation, because we do believe that knowledge should always, we ask these two questions, knowledge for whom and knowledge for what. And you know, this is Michael Barawi who insisted on it just 1 month ago when he was here in our guest at EUB. So we should ask ourselves always when we produce knowledge that whether knowledge is for academic audience, and we know that 10 per average 10 people read highly impact articles in or articles in highly impact international journals. So the audience often is very small, even everywhere. So whether our audience should be academics or extra academics, looking for publics with S. And what is the purpose of our knowledge? It means knowledge for whom, whether we want instrumental knowledge or a more reflexive to go into critical thinking, or to deal with the order from state, international organization, what we call policy. Okay, so let's. We choose not to take an example from Western countries, but from really a country. It's South Africa, which has different national languages, so it's not only English. So this is actually this I did before. This my preliminary research where. I look to the what is the share of research activities in South Africa referring to many work done before also by Webke, for instance, a German scholars. I realized that the most important share is a professional. And I mean by professional here, after Barawi, is any research done in a long durée inside of the university, not for an order done from where. And and sometimes we have a critical research. It means that our research is not based on field work, but we do a little bit of epistemology. We step back and look to the whole discipline and so on. And as you see that the most important part of the activity is a professional, but then you have this critical and public. It means that you enter in conversation with the public, you disseminate your knowledge to the public, but also you have a policy moment. It means that you try to influence the decision making. So I would say this is a kind of a model of the interrelationship between interconnectedness between these four type of activities. Now, if I will talk about the Arab state precisely, I would say we have a problematic when we look to the research activities. First, because if I look to social science precisely, so it's this science is doubly delegitimized. Not only by an authoritarian state, and you know what I mean by that. You should have attended 2 days ago or last week the conference, about Arab uprising to understand this, the persistence of this authoritarian state. But also, I would say there is some ideological group, and specifically the religious authority, come to delegitimize the social science. And this is my ongoing research project, actually. So when we come to the Arab East, Al-Mashriq al-Arabi, we realize that, in fact, the most important activities is policy and not professional. And policy because of international funding come, so it's often for short period, 1 year, or maximum sometimes 6 months, 1 year and a half if we are so lucky, and in fact the critical and the public, they are a smaller share of the research activity. But what is very interesting to look at it is not the size of each share, but in fact to look to whether there is a connection or not. Compared to, if you look to South Africa, there is really interconnected. Here is much less. For instance, when we look to the op-eds, who write op-eds in Lebanon, we find that the op-eds it's written rarely by academics. So in fact, the public, you see, public research, public activities is done by writers. This category, you find it in the Arab world much more than elsewhere. Compare just one word by, for instance, Libération, Le Monde in France, 85% when I did my sample of those who write op-eds are academics or from the CNRS. In Lebanon is very few, and in the Arab world. So you have those who do professional research, they don't have this public moment. Just for policy, I look to ISQA advisor. I mean, those who did consultancy for ISQA, 32 CVs I got. From this 32, we find that only 5 did really research related to report they produce for ISQA. It means that you have the others, they become like expert in just hunting a project. Consultancy, so the consultancy is not the policy moment of a professional research we do. It's more hunting of fund money, because we are often much more paid as a consultant than as a researcher. So this is the case on the Arab East. Thanks God that in Maghreb al-Arabi, the situation is much better. The university is still very, very important, and the critical policy and public and public movement are very related to the professional compared to the Arab East. I don't have time to develop. This is just to open your appetite to read, hopefully, the book. Okay, so in generally speaking, we have two problems: knowledge fragmentation and weak knowledge translation. So I will go for 4 reasons for that. So first is research infrastructure. We have terribly in the Arab world lack of national or pan-Arab portals or full-text searchable electronic content platform. I mean, if something published in Algeria, is no way to find it in Lebanon or vice versa. I mean, the newly established Al-Manhal, Ma'rifa, Dar al-Manzuma in Saudi Arabia recently, all this searchable database are very recent, and they cover from 2,800 journals in the Arab world, academic journals in the Arab world. They cover maximum 300 journals. So there is a lot of knowledge. It's really what we call it invisible knowledge. Now, institutional hurdle, it's I think the promotion system in many universities, like our university, doesn't encourage our faculty to diversify their research activities and to spend time in a public moment and go where to talk with the constituency beneficiary. Sometimes it's a painful process. Sometimes it takes a lot of time. My research on refugee camps, I would say that the public moment of it is 90% of time I spend it for this research. So I say what the meaning of this and what pressure can bring to do that. So and in fact we are looking in a model of university very commodified knowledge. The best university, you know about more than me about the whole issue of ranking. We look only to hierarchy to see ourselves. It's like in a fashion, etc. We don't see the ecology of our university, how our university make impact in the university. The role of a university in a rural Sudan should be extremely different from the role of the university in Khartoum or in Beirut, etc. So no, it's so funny, stupid to do this kind of ecology. The third things I would say is a scientific community, a small number. We have, this is a very important issue. In the Arab world, rarely to find an active scientific associations, and we look to this scientific association not only to protect the researcher against authoritarian regime and the group sometimes, but also to promote local research agenda and generate public debate. And here, just in sociology, place where I know that absolutely we in the whole Arab world you have only 2 or 3 active associations, national association. Recently, in the last 5 years, we have Arab Council for Social Science. I think this is hopefully will play a role in this trigger this kind of scientific community. The final things is that the majority of academics is really not engaging in their society. We have many example, not only looking to op-eds, it's analyzing CVs. You should know this work is a 5 years work. Okay, so we did a lot of participant observation. We come from different trajectory. Even I would say Rigas started much earlier in China, in Mexico, etc. Myself, I am more grounded to understand what happened in the Arab world before even. So and we have a lot of evidence. We cannot talk about it here, but maybe we leave it to discussion. I will give you 2 examples today. One research we did about Arab academics in Arab writing about the Arab writing about the Arab uprisings. So we look with Nada al-Maghlouth, my dear students, to the 520 articles published in the first 2 years of the Intifada, and we look who cite whom, who are the cited author of these. And if you see, it's a very interesting, that is a very Arab topic, a topic very important for the Arab world, that the most cited is Samuel Huntington. And then I will leave the name in red because I will talk about them later on, that Eva Billen, Lisa Anderson, Mark Lynch, Marina Ottaway, Stephen Heidman, etc. Almost all of them come from ivory tower universities or in United States and think tanks. Only we have some very interesting exception to talk about it, like Asif Bayati is a sociologist, and not only because he is a sociologist that I highlight him, because he spent so much time in the region, while the other political scientists I mentioned, they came just for a brief moment. So Charles Tilly is another sociologist. Vincent Gisser is from France, not from United States. It's very interesting because he spent many years and he got 16 citation, as well as Beatrice Hibou, another French researcher. What I would like to, I highlight 3 names in yellow. In yellow, it's Edward Said, the late Edward Said. Of course, he was mentioned, but as a peripheral citation. It means just to say that some of his view about how the West look at us is still there, etc. But what I found interesting is the breakthrough of Muna al-Ghubashi, which is an Egyptian woman based on Columbia University, still an ivory tower place, and Ghassan Salami based on Sciences Po in Paris. He is Lebanese, you know him. So it's among those who are cited more than 10 times, you don't have even one name who is based here. My dear friend Fawaz Trabulsi, for instance, who wrote so much in different newspaper and in books in Arabic, was not cited one time, and this means that how much the writing for the public is marginalized, how it was seen by academics, including Arab academics, okay, and how much they are neglected is also when these authors are from outside. So I don't have time to show you how we cluster these references and how you understand the relationship between who cite whom and where is how the Arabs, whether the Arabs cite themselves or not. And this is here really I would thank so much Tariq Mitri, with what I saw in this in IFI, I will thanks to this Arab policy, because it's very important. We should communicate with us in Arabic. We should know each other. But secondly, because they did 2 weeks ago this kind of conference, this is the first time I see a conference on Arab uprising where you bring Arab, none from the famous leftist elite. I mean, for the first time, I found Islamists talk about their vision, their program, and not we bring the leftists, their enemy, to talk about them. So I think this is a kind, all this economy, political economy of citation is one reason of it, that this so compartmentalized elite we have. So last word, and I will stop here, that in fact AUB is so happy to be the most internationalized, but you see the bad news, it's in the bottom in concerning local relevance. I see, for instance, USG, which publish much visible in Web of Science and the Scopus, but it's much more, its work much more relevant. They have very well connected to private sector, to economy, that in fact, this is why we should always be looking to be in the same time, without dichotomy, to be internationalized and locally relevant. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Rigas. Thank you, Sary, for committing to the time. I'll ask now Dr. Hassan Sharif and Dr. Satni Shami to join me. As you see, we have a full program. And now I have two of my colleagues, Dr. Sharif and Dr. Shami, who will actually comment on the presentations and indeed the book. Dr. Hassan Sharif is the advisor on science policy in the CNRS. I'll give you 12 to 15 minutes.
Good evening, and it's a good chance for me to meet all of you. And my second chance to comment on the book. I had the chance to comment on it on Arabic. But let me say that the English version is not quite a translation. It is quite a bit of more effort into it. And I would like to start by saying that the two authors have done a tremendous job. I have to really comment on their expertise, and they have tried to put quite a bit of effort into a topic that's extremely important. And what makes it more important is the fact that there are very little literatures about this topic in Arabic or in English, but unfortunately in Arabic as well. And that's why the work of both authors is extremely important, though I may have some reservations that I'll be mentioning today. The topic is extremely important because in the Arab world, the issue of research has been more or less, and to a great extent, an issue of prestige at the national level rather than of a need. And that's why they did point out to this. And also, I would have to say that most of the research has been, in the Arab world, of course, have been pushed quite a bit by the international agenda, which, like they mentioned, did not all the time fit what's needed locally. I would have to mention also that they were very courageous in trying to provide an innovative methodology, and I really respect that. I just mentioned a few points on their methodology. They had a real critical review of prevailing indicators and indices, and they stressed that most of indicators used, particularly by international institutions, are not quite relevant to research in the Arab world. They were very critical of the internationally imposed norms and criteria for ranking countries. And even though they tried to say that the ranking of the Arab countries in research were very, very skewed, but they fail in actually presenting a different criteria to show how you can adjust the skewing of the international ranking. So they were actually very innovative in this sense. I cannot cover all the topics that they have covered. I would have to say they had a very ambitious job to cover lots and lots of topics that really need not just one volume, but lots of volume. I'll try to mention some of these things. But from the very beginning, I would have to say I will not cover all the topics they have covered because, one, I'm not expert in bibliometrics, and I have a good chapter on bibliometrics. Unfortunately, it is directed to the expert, not to the learned reader like me. So that's one of the problems that they have faced, that they did not address a special audience. They moved around between different audiences, researchers, bibliometric people, general public, and so on. So the book is really confusing to this effect. And this is one of the critical things that I have to say, okay? And also, I will not address the social research because I'm more on basic and hard sciences than in social sciences. Of course, my colleague will probably cover the social part of that, okay? On general remarks, I would say, as I said, they have covered quite a bit of issues, quite a bit of topics, and they have confused them without ordering. Now, as an engineer and a hard scientist, I am confused when you mix things together, okay? So maybe next time you have to add a more hard science co-author with you to organize your book, okay? And also you have to select your audience, because if you write to everybody, then you're not writing to anybody, okay? And this is a very important issue. However, I would say they had defined their objective at the very beginning of the book, and to a great extent, they were able to cover the objectives. I will not go through it. They have gone through it, and I think they were able to cover quite a bit of the objectives that they wanted to say. But more important than any, and I have to say that very clearly, and I have to really thank you for that, they have addressed quite a bit of taboo issues and issues that were to a great extent forbidden to be spoken about in the Arab countries, and in Arabic very specifically. I mentioned some of that. They have mentioned quite many times the impact of authoritarian regimes that have oppressed tremendously the free thinking of the researchers in most Arab countries. In fact, they talked about brain-dead countries. Free thinking is not allowed, and you cannot have research without free thinking. And I have to say, you were very courageous to mention that in most Arab countries. Also, you have mentioned quite a bit the failure of the education system and the disconnection between research and the education system. We are, as Arab countries, spending tremendously on education, but the output of education so far is extremely poor, and they were courageous enough to say that. And I think more of that should be written, and more of that should be analyzed and discussed. They did mention the lack of research national policies. They said that in most Arab countries, practically there is no national research policy, and if there is any, it would be more for embellishment and for show. Okay? But also they were courageous enough to say that most universities, even prestigious universities like AUB, either they don't have a research policy or they have a skewed research policy. They said that most Arab universities, prestigious Arab universities, who are pushing research, actually they are pushing research only as a criteria for promotion of researchers and professors, but not for interacting with the society. And this is a very important point. They did mention that in their presentation. There is a total disconnect between the research topic, even in social sciences, and the problems of the society around most Arab universities. And I think this is a very important point that you have mentioned and you were courageous enough to mention, okay? One of the things that they have discussed, who is entitled to decide on the topic of research? And here I have to mention that they did say that most of the time research is imposed by the agenda of the funder. And sometimes Sary very specifically said, we should have more freedom for the researcher to select. I would say, yes, you have to have the freedom to select your topic as long as you select it from what's needed around you in the society. So you have to have a balance. You have to be away from what's imposed by the international funding agencies particularly, but you have to link also to what's needed in the society around you, even in hard and engineering sciences. One thing that I have mentioned, and I have not seen it anywhere else so far, there is no monitoring and evaluation mechanism for the research and the impact of research. And this is very important. All countries, and in fact, this is discussed highly in advanced countries. What is the value that we are obtaining from research? What's the impact that we're getting from how much we're spending on research? They are discussing it. I'm not sure that they have come to any mechanism. Rigas may tell us. But in the Arab world, they don't even discuss it. Okay, we are spending very little on research. They just mentioned that. But they mentioned also that the output of research is very poor, to the level that one paper published in Jury magazine cost $400,000. Now, this is ridiculous. Okay, the average paper in the Arab countries costs $400,000 to be published in juried magazines. Now, they were courageous enough to mention that and to criticize it, and I think this is a very important point too. Other important issues that I discussed, and I think is very important, is the very slow development of scientific communities. And there is no effort to build scientific communities. There is tremendous effort for international cooperation and international networking, but very little cooperation on the local level, much less on the regional level. You look into the co-authoring of papers, most of the time, the co-authors are from different countries. And when they are from the same country, most of the time it is, I hate to say it, but I have proof of it, many of those whose names appear as co-authors of the same country, they don't know what is it about. They just have their name mentioned, and you know that. And it is very important that you mention the lack of the formation of local communities. The CNRS tried to overcome that by two efforts. One was successful, which is the associate research effort, and we have about 10 of them by now. But when we tried to form research groups, we failed drastically. Nobody wanted to work with anybody else. And this is a fact, not just in Lebanon, but in most other Arab countries. And I think this is a very important point that is in the book, not only in the Arabic version, although in the Arabic version was much less, but in the English version was stressed a lot. Again, when they talked about the role of the state, of course, we have to have a role of the state, but we have a very ambiguous role of the state, and they have a very critical discussion of the role of the state. Not just funding, but direction, guidance, and so on. And I think the discussion of that, although it was diffused throughout the book, should have been stressed a bit more. But the role of the state in research should be clarified a bit more. There is a very link between research and education. Whatever, even in a prestige university like AUB, you have lots of researchers, but the time allocated for research is very limited, although it is much more than in other universities. But the worst is even your research is not included in what you teach. So there is a total disconnection between research and education. And there is total disconnection, and I think this is again courageous that they mentioned, between the education system in most Arab countries and the needs of the society or the job market. Most of our graduates, they come unemployed when they go out, unless they continue their education. Okay, I'm coming to an end, although I have lots to say, but I'll stop here, except for mentioning a few things. I have to say that they were very, if you want to say, innovative in dividing the countries between hegemonous countries in research and non-hegemonous countries, not dominating countries and developed countries on one side and underdeveloped countries, but they mentioned hegemonous countries and non-hegemonous countries, and they did say that the hegemonous countries are the one imposing the agenda of research, while other countries are only followers, and they are not doing it. And also they mentioned, and this is the last point I say, there is no transfer mechanism for the output of research between what's published and what the countries need. I would stop here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Sharif. Now we move to Dr. Shami, Dr. Satrin Shami. Dr. Shami is the Director General of the Arab Council for the Social Sciences, and the council, I know, is based now in Beirut. So Dr. Shami, another 12 to 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. As many of the commentators have already said, I agree that this is many books in one. And so it was really a difficult task. I agreed to do this very quickly when Sary asked me, by the way, at some at some event, and I said sure. And you know, it was a very interesting task, but a very difficult one, because indeed there are many stories that are in this book, and many sort of threads that one can follow through the text. And so I actually look forward to reading this again and more carefully, and you know.
Well, you have to read it 3-4 times.
Many times, and divide it in different ways, not necessarily according to the chapters. But also, the task was made more difficult because I'm reading it with two hats. I mean, I'm reading it as the director of the Arab Council for Social Sciences, so this is an extremely relevant text that we have to read well, all of us, I think, who are involved with the council, and think about the lessons that we can draw, very practical lessons that we can draw as we exercise our programs and develop them, and think about how to develop and promote the social sciences, even though, you know, it's only social sciences that we're working on. But the whole universe that is described in this book is obviously extremely relevant. So I was reading it with that hat, or with those lenses. I was also reading it as a social scientist myself, who's interested in knowledge production and so on. So I'm going to be actually quite short, because there was so much to say that I decided not to say most of it, because I think it would get into a lot of detail. But first, in addition to what I just said, I mean, the book contains so much so useful frameworks for studying different aspects of knowledge production, as well as an array of methodologies. I mean, it's an eclectic book. Each chapter has a different methodology, if not more than one within the same chapter. So I think as a research agenda setting book, this is very important and very timely and very useful for all sorts of institutions and people who are engaged in trying to improve the situation of knowledge production in our region. So I would very much like to see such a book used in teaching. You mentioned that we rarely use our own research in teaching, and that's very true. And this is a book, I think, around which seminars and classes could really be organized. And I also know, and it's mentioned in the book, that some of it comes out of teaching and out of seminars, actually, and out of student work. And so I think that's very positive. And one of the major contributions this book would make in a seminar or in a classroom is to help students understand that knowledge is constructed, it's not given. Knowledge is not out there, knowledge is made. And that innovation is made and forged. It's not discovered, it's not about discoveries. It's about collaborations, it's about infrastructures, it's about people working with each other, it's about traditions and histories of knowledge production. So I think in all of these ways, this book is really a useful tool, if the authors don't mind my using the word tool, but a tool in itself, actually. Now, in terms of its content, it also gives us, extremely useful and valuable documentation, analysis, snapshots of the current state of knowledge production across the region in many different countries, with a focus on Lebanon and a little bit on Jordan, but also many, many examples from many countries in the region. Two areas that I would have loved to read more, that I think could be an agenda for future books or even for projects or group projects. One is this tension between the national and the global that the authors refer to, especially in the introduction, but it comes up again and again and again. I would have liked to see more, sort of in terms of as a framework and as an analysis, how they would like to understand that relationship in knowledge production. Because, and again, maybe on a more careful reading of the book, it would become more clear to me. But as a snapshot of the present, that was very clear. I mean, the discussion around the knowledge economy and the sort of imposition or this bandwagon of knowledge economy that all the countries in the region have jumped upon, the book very usefully points out that this has concrete institutional repercussions. And that the way institutions, under the notion or within the notion of knowledge economy, paves the way for a certain kind of research institution, very different from those that preceded it, spending funds and organizing research in very different ways. So there the global is very clear. The interaction with older institutions is not as clear in the book, and I would have really liked to see more about that, but realize that it's a whole nother agenda of research. But I felt a little bit that the national, which sometimes is called the local, is being sort of given short shrift. It's being dismissed a little bit too quickly. And at the same time, especially in the second half of the book, no, not necessarily, but at the same time in certain chapters, the focus is only on the national and the global disappears. So I was really left like where the global comes in and where is it relevant, where is it not relevant, where does the national persist and where does the national end. So there are a couple of places where, in quoting Ronald Wast, you say scientific communities were born in the age of national science after colonial rule withdrew. And also in another place, national science gives way to globalization. So there is the idea that national science only emerges at the end of colonialism, and secondly, in the 1980s, it gives way to globalization. I found those a bit too quick, a bit too shallow, needing much more kind of in-depth. And for me, because I'm an anthropologist and a historian by vocation, especially this looking at pre-colonial past as well as the colonial past, I think are extremely important because there is a history of scientific research and production and scientific communities in the colonial past in this region, but also in the pre-colonial, pre-British, French, Italian, etc. mandates. And so that long history should not really be seen as not contributing to a national community, okay? It is the precursor, it is national. In the 19th centuries, it is self-consciously national. So I think that history is important, but of course, the state, I mean, if you're looking at the role of the state, then it's only after national states and post-colonial states come into being that they are focused on creating a national community. I mean, that is obvious, but the conditions are there, and the phenomenon is there, I think. And the idea that national science gives way to globalization, again, I think the book itself shows that it is not so clearly, not only is it not so clearly demarcated in the 1980s, but it never sort of becomes completely only global and no longer national. In the US and in Europe, I was part of an effort when I was working at the Social Science Research Council before I came to the Arab Council here. We had this effort with a number of colleagues to try and convince national donors in Europe and in the US to give just a small percentage of their budgets for international collaboration. And it was almost impossible to make this argument at that time. I mean, their argument was, our mandate as national donors is to fund the national scientific community. It's not to fund them to collaborate internationally. And you began to see the change. Nowadays, you see some change in that because there's an understanding that to be competitive, you have to collaborate internationally. So, but this was a very slow sort of realization for institutions to come to. So the national still has a very strong force and presence in the funding and organization of science and research and knowledge. Another part of this, which again in the book it's mentioned several times, that research is national, although science is international, and science has always been international. There are a couple of sentences like that. And again, that's the sort of thing I would really like to see more research done on and more written about. Because, of course, colonial science, which was often, undertaken in the colonies, meant that, colonial subjects were part of the colonial science as well. I mean, there's the wonderful novel by Amitav Ghosh called The Calcutta Chromosome, where he talks about how the discovery that mosquitoes were the vector for malaria was discovered in India, in fact, and by Indian, doctors and so on who were working with British doctors, but then the British doctors take the credit for the discovery, but yet it's a co-creation, it's a co-discovery. It's not a discovery only of the colonial regimes. And of course, this is the same for so many fields. Urban planning really emerged in the colonies rather than in the metropole. Things like English literature as a discipline emerged in India, because why would you call it English literature if you were teaching it in England, right? So English literature as a canon, as a field of study, emerges in the colony and not in the metropolis. So this sort of history, I think, and sociology of national science is really interesting to look into. Coming more to, but this is maybe, everyone's saying, oh, this is really a tangent, and it's just, what gets me excited. But the other part of it is so the first point was the tension between the national and the global. But the second question I want to ask and just encourage more reflection on is, why are we talking about the Arab world and knowledge production in the Arab world? Why is our unit the Arab world? And you may think this is ironic, since I direct a council for the Arab Council for Social Sciences, so why the Arab world? But in a way, in the social sciences, the Arab world, the Arab region makes sense. In the humanities, it makes sense. In literature, it makes sense. I need to be convinced that in the scientific fields, it makes sense to talk about an Arab world. Because what makes a world, a scholarly world, is institutions that are in communication with each other, individuals who are circulating between those countries, ideas that are circulating within that particular framework. And all that, you can say, yes, exists for the social sciences, for the humanities, for journalism, for all sorts of, long histories and for religion and so on. There is a circulation where a unit like the Arab world makes sense. For the sciences, it would be very interesting to know if there is such a unit called the Arab world. Unit may be too strong a word, but is there such a framework as the Arab world when it comes to the sciences? Perhaps there is, but that would be very interesting to show rather than to take as granted. And so I really appreciated the chapter on research, the national research systems, where 2-3 different groupings appeared within the Arab world, right? Four groupings appeared in the Arab world. And so that was very interesting. So there are at least 4 different types of countries in the Arab world. And the question for me is, with what other countries could you productively compare those countries instead of comparing them, across the Arab world? And I think I'll stop there. I feel you're getting nervous about the time. But honestly, I mean, every chapter and every subheading here could be a project of its own, and I look forward to them becoming such projects. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Please ask Sary and Rigas to come back. Please. I'll first give you 3 minutes each to comment or reflect on the discussants' points, and then we'll take some questions from the floor. Okay? So only 3 minutes. Only 3 minutes.
Okay, 3 minutes. Okay, 3 minutes, 1 minute for each.
Yeah, I'll give them to comment on the discussion.
3 minutes and one. I have 3 topics, 1 minute each. First, the topic on we should talk about the state a little bit more. One of the comments of Hassan, and try to understand its role. And we did not really go into detail into that. What I'm pointing at is that most research projects today are not the result of solely the authority of the state. And you can't create a new research agenda with just the force of the national authorities of a state. And this is true both nationally and internationally. So that would be one of the things that seems to me. It goes to the caricature we have of going from national to international. Yes, it is a caricature. And we use that because it was an easy way to understand the really different role actors played into defining the agendas. So the third and last one, so that will be less than 3 minutes. The example of Amitav Ghosh is very good. The scientific basis of the book of Amitav Ghosh is Kapil Raj, who's a friend of mine, by the way, and who has worked on that and has shown these things. And I can mention other cases. So soil sciences was born in the tropics, and landscape analysis was born also in tropical geography. What we wanted to point out by saying is showing that the institutions that are created in the Arab world were just caricature of institutions. In most cases, they did not convey the force of creating groups of research groups that could circulate freely, that could really engage into defining what they should work on. It's also the result of forces, but that was what we were trying to point to.
Just I wanted really to insist in a very important point you raised, and I think if we should to do a second edition is to clarify this. National science is mean national organized science. It's about science organization. It's not. We are not saying there is no national production at all. It's not. We are not putting at all into dichotomy the globalization and the national science. The whole message of the book is to say, look, I mean, you don't understand the research dynamic in a place without looking to both sides. The national science is really a term. It means, has a specific meaning. It means that when the state wanted alone to monopolize the agenda setting of the science. And I think here we argue that globalization really make this almost impossible, specifically for the non-hegemonic countries, for country in development, because most of their funding come from abroad. And just a word also to defend the use of Arab word as a for not only for social science but for all sciences, because we never say sufficiently how much we need. I mean, there is a common geographical, environmental features in this region. This region is the less water per capita in the world. I mean, again, if you look to science priorities in almost all the Arab countries, you find water and energy. It's the two priorities, and it's terribly lacking the collaboration between these Arab countries. So I think we want to push because of the situation, but also because we believe that the dynamics. If you bring Arab, I mean, the importance of collaborating between Arabs is much more important. Collaborating between Arab and non-Arab. Just one example, and I will stop. I look to Qatar. Who are those who produce in 2009 around 500 papers in Qatar? I look 2 years later, and I found these people are not anymore in Qatar. So this is when Qatar wanted only to collaborate with Harvard, Princeton, etc. It become like a shadow professor phenomenon, etc. I mean, if they would have collaborated with, I don't know, Palestinian, Lebanese, etc., we see more synergy and people, research team in Qatar and working together, etc. So I think it's a utopian, if you like, but utopian really because we believe it. It's very important. I stop here.
We'll have a round of 3 questions, direct questions. Because I'm concerned about the time, Dr. Shami. So 3 questions, direct to the point. طبعا نعمل مداخلات كثير معك. Direct questions, and please introduce yourself. Where we'll start. بلش من فوق and we go. Amir, yeah.
My name is Cynthia. I'm a student in sociology. I'm doing my master's here. I'm particularly interested in Burawi's typology and how it was applied to the Arab world. And my question is, what would be the best way to assess sociologists' implication in the public debate, especially that when we think of how the public sphere developed in our part of the world, okay, we had at a certain point the importance of print capitalism and public gardens and open spaces for the public to attend different conferences, etc. But then things changed, and sects got involved, religious institutions got involved, etc. So taking all of this into consideration, how would be the best way to assess the sociologists interacting or engaging in a debate with the public, and what would be this public sphere actually?
Another question?
شكرا جزيلا. Thank you very much. I have many things to ask.
Start with one.
First, why this difference between the title of the book in English, which is different from Arabic?
Okay.
Second, are you sure that there is a book or the authors collect articles and make them a book? So, I will produce first example. All of you saw on the screen a list that we read the name of Ghassan Salam as one of the most cited authors. That is the Arabic book. We don't find, I don't know, Ghassan Salam. We read on the screen the name of Professor Edward Said. It is the second after Samuel Harrington in the English version. But Edward Said is number 19 in the Arabic edition. Third.
Direct to the point, Dr. Abdel.
Third. Most of the chapters have been published. So, I want to ask if the introduction of a book which is called مستقبل العلوم الاجتماعية في الوطن العربي. The introduction of this book, which have 3 authors, became the 5th chapter. All chapters have been published, but he changed their names, especially chapter 8, and I ask doctor or professor or researcher Rigas, does Monalik Bashi is French or Egyptian? We read here that it is French, but how? She became a French because the chapter in English took him, so he canceled this or that page, so Monalik Bashi became a French. I will not continue, but I am sorry to say that we have to stop it to write in 2 languages, in 2 places, because that is not good for the authors or for the AUP or for the cows. Thank you.
I take your question about the process of publication, and probably the authors will answer it. Let's move to our colleague, and then to our colleague here, and then we'll give Sary and Rigas the opportunity to answer.
Hi, my name is Sima Ghaddar. I'm an instructor here at AUB. I do have a lot of questions, but I think it's only when I read the book that I'm going to be able to formalize them. My first question, yeah, sure. My first question is about the categorization of professional, public, critical, and policy. When you speak about public production of knowledge, you particularly emphasize the interaction of the professional with the public, but I don't have a very identified understanding of what forms of public production of knowledge there might be. So just kind of an explanation of what you mean by production of public rather than just addressing the public, but rather different avenues of knowledge production that are not necessarily limited to university settings or research centers. Another thing, just I was wondering the comment between the relationship between education and research production, which is how is it that we as teachers, for example, what is it that we would decide to teach students, and that's just an example. And this is a very much more relaxed understanding of knowledge production, not as research or policy-oriented knowledge production. This is really kind of constructing knowledge. So I was just wondering if I'm hoping at some point if there would be any research on the kind of syllabi, for example, the teachers decide to give their students, and what authors would be mentioned in these syllabi if they were local, or what kind of topics they would focus on if they're related to local issues. Thanks.
Great. And last question, please.
I'm sorry to say you haven't mentioned that those authors who are publishing locally, some of them were trained outside, but the system corrupted them to the extent they go for number count, publishing in newspaper. If they were good enough, they could publish at a high level instead of letting Western people discuss our issues. As you mentioned, we have so many scholars interested in ours, but we are not participating in the international debate, and I see Sary calling more isolation to create a local group which more disconnected. Instead of moving up, you are saying less engaged locally and be complete disconnection. So this is really completely wrong. We'd like to be correct, and the world are interested in our issues, but we are not communicating with them. So this requires the scholarship that we had outside and push it here. I don't think AUB or any institution would tell you what to do. I haven't seen it. So the question, people are taking the easy way out through politics, whatever. This is one point. And your book, what's the objective of it? If the objective to improve, then I haven't seen any recommendation or policy then to move forward. So if it is a descriptive approach, I'm fine. If it is to identify peer so that I will mimic to improve, I haven't seen it. I haven't read it, but I haven't seen any presentation on it. So it's a matter of grouping. Grouping, this one normally goes for the trend. A trend analysis, unfortunately, it removes the best and the weak. The best actually to mimic to improve, and the weak to really identify to improve them. So I think here you have a question of methodology. Then another issue, if you want to talk about buying in, moving from combining rigor and relevance. From humble experience, you need 3 players. So you need the right data, you right policymaker who believe that your work will add value to them. And the second one, your analytic approach must be convincing. Any failure or disconnection between those two, you will never find any impact. So it will become research for the leisure. And thank you very much.
So
Yeah, can I will start, I guess. Okay. Let me start by your very interesting question, Cynthia, about the way of engaging with the public. Yes, this is why in chapter 5 I consider, for instance, one of the big issue in the Arab world whether we engage with religious leaders, for instance, that they capture very important audience in the Arab world, whether we enter into conversation with them, whether etc. Absolutely, we need to look to where to find the publics, whether the publics in the newspapers or we can enter into conversation with them through newspapers, through TV, through social media, through mosque, church, etc. This is absolutely this is why we put public with S, because really we should engage in a different levels and specifically enter into conversation directly with them, maybe in the street, maybe through demonstration, and so on. So I think we should be very creative to think where the encounter should be. And just the example, beyond many participant observation and examples brought in this book, I took only the example of the op-eds, but this is absolutely something to pursue. And then I will not take them in order, but I will address and I will let some aspect to dealt by Rigas. Also about your question about the public, whether there is a knowledge produced outside of the academia, and absolutely, and this is, and I think I should praise the knowledge report produced by Arab Council for Social Science. It's called Al-Muraqib, Al-Marsad Al-Ma'rifi, just launched 1 month ago, that highlighted the importance of knowledge produced by civil society, for instance. Okay, so by no means I am saying that knowledge is produced within the academia. It's just the object of this book. We are interested because the institution for us, the university and research center, this is why we highlight the role of academies, but I totally agree with you. Now, Ibrahim, well, you know, in 2009, I published an article called Publish Globally and Perish Locally versus Publish Globally and Perish Locally. Yes, we don't want at all these two profiles. We are not advocating at all for people. We are not advocating for Fawaz Trabulsi only publish in Arabic journals in Arabic. No, not at all. But I mean, to say this is the dilemma we have, and we want both knowledge to be visible and each faculty can have a different moment of publication. And this is lead me to some of question of Dr. Abu Namel. I know some of his question is just règlement de compte. I mean, just a revenge for other things, but I will not address this. But I would say, yes, and we are proud that some part of this book, it was experimented in a different format of writing, op-eds, introduction in this, some of this material, 5 years. Imagine that we will deprive our readers for 5 years until we publish in a book. Always there is experimentation, and we collect and we fix. And actually, this is the example you brought is a very interesting. That in fact, when we revise the English version, we realize that we did a mistake about salami. We thought because some of the writer, they don't write some of the database from where we gather the reference, they don't put the full name. It's a G.Salami. So we thought there is, and Ghassan Salami, we thought there is two different authors. When we make more verification, we found no, it's the same author. So we put him in the English version. So we are very reflexive author, and so we mention him. Edward Said, exactly. I don't know if you came for a presentation or not. In the beginning, I said it's a clear, in Arabic and English, it's the same. Edward Said was it was a lip service as a reference. It was not very important. It's not. I am not saying at all he is not important. I mean, it is very important how for instance, author engaged with Muna Ghabashi, an Egyptian. He has a position. She is a close of Muslim Brotherhood. Here, where I expand, develop some ideas. I mean, to say that to bring lip service about Edward Said, say yeah, Orientalism here and there. It was not important for Arab uprising. I found that. So it's not. You play on this nationalist register that, etc. I mean, really, I don't like it, but it's okay. Yep. Please, Rigas.
Yeah, I would like just to the comment you did about the clustering methodology. In fact, it's we use a methodology that's is based on a machine called Cortex, which I'm funding as director of the Institute. I was not at the time we did the work. The method is elaborated by a group of 15 mathematicians, and they do this clustering methodology. So I think as in terms of, and one of our co-authors in a paper we published is one of these mathematicians. What the clustering method that we have used has had the advantage of being rather robust on the
of the analysis.
Yeah, there was this.
To identify the best, then clustering does not help. You need to go for another approach to identify the best being, and then to improve. So this is my remark. So what you are doing is correct. So what's your objective?
Yes, you are right. The objective is not to identify who's the best. The objective was to identify how is the mapping of the discussion on the Arab revolutions. That was the objective, and trying to use this method based on what the names of the authors that are cited in a collection of articles that are quite complete in their publication, written in Arabic, in French, and in English. That was the objective. I think it's in chapter 3. We have a set of recommendations that have been discussed at 2 or 3 seminars and with policymakers that we have met, mainly in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Lebanon, and Jordan, and Egypt. We have had 2 or 3 seminars. One of them was in Esqua Technology Center in Amman, where we presented the first results on the policy making mechanisms. And one of the interesting aspects that were discussed there, that we tried to put in the book, was that there is a disconnection between the policy that has been driven in the last 30 years for creating a stable number of researchers, what usually is called capacity building, and what is today's very strong demand from many actors that interact with the universities mainly, asking not so much to do capacity building, but to try to have solutions, ready-made solutions for specific problems. And if you're fighting on the short term like that, you won't succeed, because you need to reproduce the basis of the research community that you have in order to be able to provide this kind of advice that is asked. The difficulty that we have found with people we discussed is that they say that today, because of the fact that most projects are funded on the 2 to 3 years basis, and then you fight for another project and you need to go on funding, is that if you don't have an infrastructure that supports you in doing this job, you just lose your time in doing the management aspects. And the management aspects of research in universities in most of the countries I visited, and with Sary, we did some of the case studies, were absolutely against research. I Today's director of CNRST in Morocco, Driss Abou Tajdin, would say when he was vice president of the university Agdal in University of Rabat, he was saying that it was absolutely impossible for him to spend the money that he had earned on foreign projects because of the rules that were imposed to him by the university. And this kind of difficulties, the practicalities, in fact, are an indicator of a difficulty in locating research into the universities. Things have been different with research institutes, but most research institutes, in particular in agriculture, have been revising their policies of management in the last 10 years with a lot of international support to do that. And one of the main reasons that they were losing their research capacity. People were not working anymore in these institutes. They wanted to go to the universities or in a foreign country, and particularly because they were asked to do things that they considered they were not relevant to the research they wanted to do. So this is, again, even in a qualified research institute, the proper role of research has been lost through this very difficult relation with the demands that come from outside, the pressure for solutions, the pressure for urgent useful knowledge, and the fact that you need to create a stabilized capacity, research capacity.
Thank you, Rigas. Before we conclude, if there's any pressing question, I'd like to say we have the Arabic book is on sale in the lobby reception area of the auditorium here, and we have some small bites and drinks, so you're most welcome to join us. I'd like to thank Sary, Rigas, and the discussants and all the speakers. Thank you for coming to this talk. I'm sure the book will contribute a lot to understanding knowledge production in the Arab world. I've seen UN reports here and there on the subject, but I haven't seen this eclectic, but also, thorough analysis of knowledge production and the message that I think Sary and Rigas are telling us to be engaged academics. We always talk about intellectuals and the role of professors as intellectuals and trying to really exert change and do change, but Dr. Ibrahim, we're bound by our promotion and our promotion calendar and clock. So this book really bringing some fresh ideas into the discussion. Thank you very much for writing it, and you're most welcome to join us in the book signing and in the reception. Thank you.